The speakerphone made his voice sound thin, metallic. Not the booming authority that had echoed through my childhood, but just a small sound coming from a small black rectangle on my counter. My father was calling someone he believed was my landlord. He was trying to get me evicted from my own coffee shop, right here, right now, in front of a room full of people who knew my name. The voice that answered was not a landlord. It belonged to a trust attorney, and what that attorney said next made my father's mouth fall open and stay there. I reached over and flipped the switch on the espresso grinder. The whirring stopped. Steam curled up from the machine, wrapping warm and damp around my wrist. The heavy scent of dark roast hung in the air. The entire shop had gone dead silent. My jaw ached from biting down. A strange, hollow weight settled behind my ribs. I picked up a ceramic cup and wiped the rim with a cloth. Anything else, Dad? 4 years earlier, I was sleeping on a bare mattress on the floor of a studio apartment, and the only thing I owned that was worth a dime was a bag of green coffee beans and a journal full of recipes from a dead man. I was 30 years old then, Naomi Ellison, a woman who had just been completely erased from her own family. The linoleum floor of that apartment was always freezing. I would wake up at 4 in the morning, wrap myself in a cheap blanket, and stare at my phone. I waited for a text, a missed call, just a single sign that my parents noticed I was gone. The screen always stayed dark. My bank account had $42 in it. My back ached from the floor. I lived on cheap noodles and checked my balance twice a day, watching the number shrink like a countdown. I had walked out of their house with a business plan for a coffee shop, and my father had looked at me like I was a bad investment he was writing off his taxes. He closed the door. He locked it. He expected me to starve and come crawling back, and I spent my first month of true independence just trying to figure out how to breathe without the air they provided. The memory of that night 4 years ago still tasted like copper. I had stood in the center of my parents' living room with a heavy leather binder clutched tight against my chest. Inside, that binder was my escape route. 3 years into a business administration degree I absolutely loathed. I had finally mapped out a future that belonged to me. I had market research. I had profit and loss projections. I had demographic studies for a specialty coffee shop in the downtown district. I brought the binder to my father not because I wanted his money, but because I still carried the naive, stubborn hope that the man who raised me would finally look at me and see an equal. My father sat in his oversized leather recliner. The television was off. The heavy mahogany grandfather clock in the corner ticked, loud and rhythmic, measuring out the seconds of my trial. He did not yell. He did not throw the binder. Ray Ellison did not need to raise his voice to break you. He just looked at me with eyes so flat and dark they could have been painted onto his face. I did not spend $120,000 raising a barista, he said. His voice was a quiet, steady hum that vibrated right through the Persian rug and into the soles of my shoes. He spoke about me the exact same way he spoke about a bad stock portfolio. I was an investment that was failing to yield the expected return. My hands gripped the edges of the binder so hard my knuckles turned white. Dad, if you would just look at the numbers, the profit margins on specialty roasting are expanding. I found a gap in the local market. I have a plan. He held up one hand. Just a slight lift of his palm, and the entire room went dead silent. You have a plan? A slow, humorless smile touched the corners of his mouth. You are 30 years old, Naomi, and you think you know more than me about how the world works. You sound like a 20-year-old college dropout pitching a pipe dream in a dorm room. You are throwing your life away. I looked desperately toward the sofa. My mother sat there, shrinking into the expensive upholstery. She had her knees pressed tightly together, her hands folded in her lap. Her fingers worked frantically, endlessly rolling and unrolling the hem of her cashmere cardigan. Mom, I whispered. Tell him. You tasted the roasts. You said they were good. Vivian Ellison swallowed hard. She looked at my father, then looked at the floor. She opened her mouth. "Ray," she started, her voice trembling like a dry leaf. Maybe we should just listen to her for a minute. She worked very hard on. My father turned his head slowly, those flat eyes locked onto her. He did not say a single word. He did not have to. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating, pressing down on all of us. My mother closed her mouth. She looked down at her hands and let go of the cardigan. She smoothed the fabric flat over her knees. Her defense of her only daughter had lasted exactly 6 seconds. That silence said more than my father ever could. Behind them, the warm yellow light of the kitchen was on. My older brother Trent leaned casually against the granite island. The golden boy of the Ellison family held a ceramic mug, watching the destruction from a safe, comfortable distance. He lifted a silver spoon, slowly stirring his coffee. The gentle clink of metal against ceramic echoed in the quiet house. Trent knew the rules of survival in this family. You never, ever, stepped between our father and his chosen target. He took a sip of his coffee and simply watched me drown. My father turned his attention back to me. He stood up, towering in the dim light, and carefully smoothed the front of his golf shirt. He was preparing to close the account. "I am making this very simple for you," he said. "You put that ridiculous binder in the trash. You go back to your classes on Monday. You finish the degree I paid for. Or you leave." I stood frozen. The air conditioning kicked on, sending a chill across the back of my neck. "You walk out that door with this idea," he finished, his tone dropping to absolute zero. "You walk out of this family." I waited. I stood there for 10 agonizing seconds, begging my mother with my silence to look up, to stand up, to tell him he was being ridiculous, to be a mother. She kept her eyes glued to the intricate floral pattern on the rug. I turned around and walked down the hallway to my old bedroom. The packing took less than 20 minutes. No folding. Heavy plastic trash bags from the kitchen pantry. Clothes thrown in without ceremony. The expensive dresses they had bought me for country club dinners stayed hanging in the closet. The college textbooks stayed stacked on the desk. Everything I took fit into 2 bags and a single cardboard box. Only the things I had bought with my own part-time wages. The house was completely still. Not a single footstep in the hallway. Not a knock on the door. I needed packing tape to seal a cardboard box of my books. I walked across the hall to my mother's study. The room smelled faintly of her lavender hand cream and old paper. I pulled open the top drawer of her heavy oak desk, reaching for the tape dispenser. My hand brushed against a small, unmarked white box tucked all the way in the back. The lid was slightly loose. I nudged it aside to grab the tape, but stopped. Inside the box were 3 greeting cards. They were thick, expensive envelopes, sealed tight. Postage stamps were already pressed into the upper right corners. My name was written perfectly across the center of each envelope in my mother's careful, looping cursive. My pulse did a strange, hollow flutter. I stared at the sealed envelopes, my fingers hovering over them. Why would she have cards addressed to me? Stamped and hidden in the dark. I heard my father's heavy footsteps moving across the hardwood floor in the distant living room. My chest tightened. I did not have time to think. I did not want to know what she had to say in secret when she refused to speak for me in public. I grabbed the entire white box, shoved it deep into my duffel bag under a pile of sweaters, and grabbed the packing tape. I carried my bags to the front entryway. I pulled my house key off my keyring. The metal was warm in my palm. I set it down on the glass console table. The small clatter sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. 10 minutes later, I was pulling my beat-up sedan onto the highway. The yellow streetlights swept rhythmically over the dashboard, casting long shadows across my hands on the steering wheel. I checked the rearview mirror. The manicured lawns and towering oak trees of the neighborhood I had known my entire life were rapidly disappearing into the darkness behind me. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands cramped. My jaw ached. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for the sobbing, for the breakdown, for the overwhelming grief of losing the only people I belonged to, but my eyes stayed completely dry. The only thing sitting in the passenger seat next to me was a terrifying, absolute silence. I pressed my foot down on the gas pedal and kept driving. The drive ended at a cinder block apartment complex wedged between a discount tire shop and a 24-hour laundromat. I carried my trash bags up 2 flights of concrete stairs. The studio apartment was barely larger than my childhood closet. It smelled faintly of bleach and old cooking grease, and the only piece of furniture was a twin mattress sitting directly on the scratched linoleum floor. I dropped my bags. The plastic hit the ground with a heavy, final sound. I sat on the edge of the bare mattress and kept my coat on because the radiator was broken. This was my grand rebellion. This was what I had traded my family for. The next morning, the real work began. I got a job working the opening shift at a massive corporate coffee chain off the interstate. My alarm would scream at 4 in the morning. I would roll off the floor, pull on a stiff green apron, and stand behind a counter for 8 hours. My hands were constantly stained with artificial caramel syrup and cracked from washing industrial blender pitchers in scalding water. Customers did not look at me. They looked past me, shouting their orders for frozen sugar drinks while I pulled shots of bitter, over-roasted espresso. I came home every afternoon smelling like stale milk. I would sit on my floor and watch YouTube tutorials on a cracked phone screen. I bought a cheap toaster oven from a thrift store and a 5-pound bag of green coffee beans from a local importer. My first attempt at roasting filled the tiny studio with thick, acrid smoke. I stood on a dining chair, frantically waving a damp dish towel at the screeching smoke detector while my eyes watered. The beans came out looking like charcoal briquettes. I ground them up anyway. I brewed them. I forced myself to drink the bitter, ash-tasting liquid because I could not afford to waste a single cent. The physical exhaustion was heavy, but the quiet in that apartment was worse. It pressed its my ribs when I tried to sleep, filling the space where a family used to be. I gave them exactly 2 weeks before the quiet broke me. I sat on my mattress on a Sunday evening, staring at my phone. My thumb hovered over my mother's contact name. I pressed call and held the speaker to my ear. The line rang twice. Then, a mechanical click. "Hi, you have reached the Ellisons. Please leave a message." It was my mother's voice, bright and practiced. The same greeting she had recorded 5 years ago. I hung up. I called again the next day. Voicemail. I tried a third time at the end of the month, right around the time she usually watered the front porch ferns. Voicemail again. She was there. She was just choosing the silence. So I tried Trent. My brother had always been the golden boy, the one who navigated our father's moods with perfect precision. Maybe he could bridge the gap. Maybe he could explain that I was not trying to destroy the family. I just wanted a life of my own. I dialed his number. I waited for the ring. "We are sorry. The number you have dialed is no longer in service." I lowered the phone and stared at the screen. The automated carrier message looped in my head. Trent had not just ignored the call. He had changed his number. Or worse, he had kept his number and simply blocked his sister. That was how the Ellison family operated. When an investment failed, you cut your losses and completely erased the asset from the ledger. I put the phone face down on the floor. I did not call them again. The debate was over. There was no safety net to crawl back to. A few days later, on a damp Tuesday night, I packed 2 insulated thermoses into a canvas tote bag. I walked 6 blocks in the rain to a local independent cafe. They hosted an open mic night for amateur musicians, poets, and anyone desperate enough for an audience. I was not there to sing. I set up a small folding table near the back, near the restrooms. I arranged a stack of tiny paper cups and poured out samples of my latest roast. My palms were sweating. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. People walked right past me. They held their overpriced beers and ignored the girl in the damp sweater trying to hand out free coffee. Around 10 o'clock, a woman approached my table. She had thick silver hair pinned up in a messy twist and wore a heavy wool cardigan. She did not ask what I was selling. She just picked up one of the paper cups, brought it to her nose, and took a slow sip. I held my breath. I watched her throat work. As she swallowed, the woman closed her eyes. Her face wrinkled into a severe grimace. She set the cup down carefully on the plastic table. "Honey," she said, her voice rough and entirely too loud. "This is terrible." My face burned. I reached for the cup to throw it away, ready to pack up my thermoses and walk back to my mattress on the floor. I had failed. My father was right, but the woman did not walk away. She leaned against the table and looked at me. "It tastes like burnt toast and sour lemons," she continued. "But you are here at 10 at night on a Tuesday trying to make something, so I will come back next week. Try not to burn it next time." She turned and walked out the door. I stood behind my cheap folding table and stared after her. She had not demanded perfection. She had not asked for a return on her investment. She just saw someone trying. And she offered the one thing my family had completely withheld. She offered a second chance. The next Tuesday, it rained again. I brought a new batch. It was slightly less terrible. The silver-haired woman walked through the door at exactly 10 o'clock, picked up a paper cup, and drank it. I belonged to a mattress on the floor, a cheap toaster oven, and the bitter taste of burnt coffee. But as I watched the old woman nod and place her empty cup on my table, I knew I was never going back to my father's house. I had started building my own, 6 months past, measured entirely in roasted beans and burnt fingertips. The cheap toaster oven in my tiny apartment broke twice. The savings account grew by single pennies. Pushing past the failure was one thing. But finding a physical space to build a real business was an entirely different kind of exhaustion. The search for a commercial storefront was brutal. Landlords wanted financial history. They wanted guarantors with perfect credit scores. They wanted the kind of last name that commanded instant respect in a bank lobby. Mine was just a word on a rejected application. Completely disconnected from the wealth of my father, I was a ghost in the financial system. Every heavy glass door I walked through eventually closed right in my face. The very last property on my list was located downtown. The neighborhood was slowly catching its breath, caught somewhere between boarded-up windows and expensive new construction. This particular building sat right in the middle of the block. The brick facade was beautiful but deeply exhausted. Dust coated the front display windows thick enough for someone to write their name in the grime. An aluminum folding chair scraped hard against the concrete sidewalk. An old man sat by the front door, wearing a faded green jacket and a worn baseball cap with the 1st Infantry Division logo. The city traffic roared past us, blowing a stray newspaper against his heavy work boots. He did not flinch. He just watched me stare up at the faded leasing sign. I walked up to him, clutching the exact same heavy leather binder my father had dismissed in our living room. My knuckles were white. The familiar weight of anticipated rejection settled heavy in my stomach. "Excuse me," I said, raising my voice to carry over the rumble of a passing city bus. "Good morning. I am calling about the commercial space." The old man leaned forward. His hands rested on his knees, mapped with thick blue veins and dark age spots. He did not reach for my business plan. He looked right past the leather binder, his eyes settling directly on my face. "What kind of coffee do you drink when nobody is watching?" he asked. The question hung in the damp morning air. I blinked, completely thrown off balance. The rehearsed pitch about profit margins and target demographics died instantly in my throat. "Black," I answered, the absolute truth slipping out before I could filter it for a landlord. "A medium roast from Guatemala. It is slightly bitter. I never use sugar." He nodded once. It was a sharp, decisive movement. Good. People who drink sweet copper usually lie to themselves. His name was Harold Mackey. He was 74 years old, and he owned the entire building outright. He finally took my binder, flipped past the financial projections without reading them, and closed the cover with a heavy thud. Then he leaned back in his folding chair and named a monthly rent that made my lungs stop working. It was barely half the current market rate. I took a slow step back. My shoe crunched on a piece of broken gravel. "Why so low?" I asked, my voice tight with suspicion. "What is the catch?" Harold reached into the deep pocket of his jacket and pulled out a ring of heavy brass keys. They jingled sharply against the city noise. "The catch is this," he said, his voice gravelly and firm. "You bring me a cup of that bitter coffee every single morning before 7 o'clock. You sit with me on this sidewalk for 15 minutes, and you tell me how your business is actually doing, the truth, not the glossy brochure version." I stared at the keys dangling from his weathered fingers. I had spent half a year fighting for a single chance, and this stranger was handing it to me for the price of a morning conversation. "That is it?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Harold stood up. He was much taller than I expected, though his broad shoulders carried a heavy, permanent stoop. "I have had 12 tenants in this building in 20 years, he told me, his eyes never leaving mine. 11 of them saw me as nothing more than a signature on a lease agreement. You are the first one who walked up and asked me how my morning was." I had not even realized I said it. It was just reflex. A basic human greeting before diving into a transaction. But for Harold Mackey, that simple acknowledgement was the only currency that actually mattered. He separated the heaviest brass key from the ring and dropped it into my open palm. The metal was cold and solid. I pushed the key into the rusty lock of the front door. The tumblers clicked loud and heavy, echoing out into the empty street. I pushed the thick glass door open and stepped inside the dark space. The room smelled like old dust and damp wood, but the late morning sunlight cut straight through the dirty front windows, landing in bright, warm squares across the bare concrete floor. I stood right in the center of the empty room. I closed my eyes, tracing the ghost of a wooden counter in the stale air, listening to the quiet hum of a building waiting to wake up. And for the very first time in nearly a year, I smiled. The transformation of that dusty commercial space took 3 brutal months of scraping old linoleum floors and breathing in fresh paint fumes. I built the front counter myself using reclaimed wood I found at a salvage yard. I named the shop Mackey's. Harold stood on the sidewalk with his hands tucked into his green jacket, watching me carefully paint the white letters onto the front glass. He pointed out that it was his last name, not mine. I looked over my shoulder and told him that was exactly the point. Then came Wes. Wes Takeda was 24 years old when he walked through the heavy glass door asking for an application. He kept his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a faded denim jacket and refused to make direct eye contact. He had a minor shoplifting record from his complicated years navigating the state foster care system. Every other retail manager in the downtown district saw a massive liability. I looked at the rigid set of his shoulders, the nervous tap of his worn canvas sneakers, and saw someone who just needed a single door to finally open. I handed him a blank time card and told him his first shift started on Monday. We opened on a rainy Tuesday morning. We had exactly 7 customers the entire day. The cash register printed out a grand total revenue of $83. Harold was the very first person through the door. He ordered a black drip coffee, drank the entire ceramic mug in absolute silence while sitting at a window table, and set a crisp $5 bill on the counter for a tip. He looked at me, his weathered face completely serious, and delivered his official verdict. The coffee was a 7. The company was a 10. He promised he would come back for the company. I leaned over the espresso machine, deeply offended, and asked if my carefully sourced roast was really only a 7 out of 10. Harold adjusted his faded military baseball cap. He told me he had survived the jungles of the Mekong Delta and knew exactly what bad coffee tasted like. Mine was not bad, he assured me. It just was not great yet. I let out a loud, sudden laugh. The sound echoed brightly in the empty shop. It was the first time I had truly laughed out loud in over a year. From behind the pastry case, Wes grabbed a damp wiping cloth, looked at the old man, and asked if he should post that specific review on the internet. Harold actually smiled. The days turned into months, and the months stacked into 2 quiet, steady years. Every single morning before 7 o'clock, I brought a steaming mug out to the concrete sidewalk. I sat on a plastic milk crate right next to Harold's aluminum folding chair. For 15 minutes, the waking city belonged only to us. The seasons changed, trading heavy winter coats for light summer breezes. But our routine never broke. Over those hundreds of mornings, Harold slowly handed me the broken pieces of his life. His only son had died in a terrible highway crash. At 28 years old, his wife lost a brutal, exhausting fight with cancer 10 years ago. His son's widow had packed up his only grandchild shortly after the funeral and moved across the country, completely cutting all contact. Harold had spent 20 years entirely alone in the massive brick building. One morning, while watching a delivery truck idle at the intersection, he stared into his coffee mug and told me that family is not the people who made you. It is the people who stay. Inside the brick walls, the business was thriving. 7 daily customers grew to 40, and then turned into a packed house, with a line out the door every weekend. We had an elderly neighbor who came in every afternoon for chamomile tea. We hosted a loud study group of local college students. A whole squad of firefighters began parking their heavy red engine outside on Tuesday mornings to buy pastries. Wes stepped up and became my head barista, managing the morning rush with a quiet, fierce loyalty. I finally had enough profit to open a real savings account. It was around that peak time that Thomas Ackerman called the shop phone. He was Harold's retained lawyer, calling to ask me to sign a routine commercial lease renewal. Right before we hung up, the attorney cleared his throat. He mentioned that Mr. Mackey had recently set up a formal trust for the property. He said there was a specific protective clause included in the new paperwork, but told me I did not need to worry about the legal details right then. I wiped down the steam wand and asked what the clause meant. The lawyer politely deflected the question, citing strict client privacy rules. I brushed the strange comment off and went back to pulling espresso shots. I should have paid closer attention to that phone call. I did not. 6 months later, Harold collapsed in the upstairs hallway. The hospital diagnosis was late-stage lung cancer. The disease had been hiding quietly in his chest for years, completely undetected until it was far too late. The pale doctors in the oncology ward gave him 3 weeks. I spent every single evening sitting in a stiff plastic chair beside his hospital bed. The room smelled like sterile iodine and bleached sheets. He was fading incredibly fast, his breathing reduced to a shallow, wet rattle in the quiet room, but he still demanded I bring him a heavy, insulated thermos of my daily roast. He claimed the machine stuff in the hospital cafeteria tasted like deep regret. He died on a dark, rainy Thursday night. I was sitting right there in the stiff chair. I held his thin, papery hand in both of mine. His fingers gave my knuckles one weak, final squeeze, and then he simply let go. 2 weeks later, I sat in the polished conference room of Thomas Ackerman's downtown law office. The leather executive chair felt entirely too big for me. Ackerman adjusted his glasses and read Harold's last will and testament aloud. I stopped breathing. The walls of the room seemed to tilt. Harold had left the entire commercial building to me through the Mackey Family Trust. The lawyer reached across the massive mahogany table and pushed a folded piece of heavy parchment paper toward me. It was a private letter written in Harold's shaky handwriting. I read the ink words through a thick blur of tears. "You did not treat me like a landlord," the letter said. "You treated me like someone who mattered. I spent 20 years waiting for my blood family to remember I existed. You walked in with bad coffee and good intentions, and you gave me the only thing I actually needed in this world. You showed up, Every single morning. You showed up, I cried until my chest physically ached. Not because I suddenly owned a piece of prime real estate. Because a stranger had done what my own parents refused to do. He saw me. He stayed, and I had given him the same thing without even knowing it. During the chaotic, blurry week of Harold's funeral, my cell phone had buzzed with 3 missed calls from a blocked number. I had stared at the glowing screen with exhausted eyes, entirely consumed by grief. I handed the phone to Wes across the counter and told him it was probably just spam, or maybe a hungry real estate agent. Vultures had been circling the building ever since the property transfer hit the county tax records. I deleted the missed call notifications without a second thought. 6 months after we buried my landlord, I framed a beautiful black and white photograph of Harold wearing his faded green jacket. I hung it prominently on the exposed brick wall right next to our menu board. A young college student came in one busy afternoon, bought an iced vanilla latte, and filmed a review on her phone. She zoomed her camera in on the old photograph and asked about the gruff man in the baseball cap. I leaned over the counter and gave her a 60-second version of the story. That short video exploded. 2 million people watched it in a single week. A local lifestyle magazine sent a professional photographer to interview me. Business shot up 300% almost overnight. The shop was constantly full of warm laughter, the loud hiss of the espresso wands, and the steady hum of a community. I finally had real peace, but my full legal name was now permanently attached to a commercial building worth over $500,000 in the public property tax records. And out there in the dark, someone was finally watching. The watcher in the dark did not stay hidden for long. It happened on a Friday evening. I was standing in the kitchen of my new apartment, wiping down the counters with a damp cloth. The heavy brass key to the shop sat next to the sink. My phone buzzed against the granite. I picked it up, expecting a message from Wes about the morning inventory delivery. Instead, a block of text from an unsaved number filled the bright screen. Mom and Dad know about your shop. They are coming tomorrow. Dad has been asking around about your lease. Thought you should know. There was no signature. My thumb froze over the glass. I read the words 3 times, and with every pass, the temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop. My father was not planning a surprise family reunion. He was asking about my lease. He was looking for leverage. I set the phone down, pulled open my laptop, and typed my own name into the search engine. I added the street address of the coffee shop. I hit enter. The county property tax portal loaded instantly. Right there on the very first page, my full name was listed as the sole owner of a commercial property valued at over $500,000. The transfer date was public. The trust name was public. Anyone with an internet connection could find it. My father had undoubtedly found it. Panic, sharp and metallic, flooded the back of my throat. I grabbed my phone and dialed Thomas Ackerman. The digital clock on the microwave read 9:47. The call went straight to a sterile, automated voicemail. I hung up and dialed the lawyer again. Another voicemail. I paced across the kitchen tiles, pressing the phone hard against my ear, and tried a third time. Nothing. The law office was dark until Monday morning. I lowered the phone. I was entirely alone, without a legal shield. The last 4 years of carefully built armor simply evaporated. I slid down the front of the wooden cabinets until I hit the floor. The cold tiles seeped through my jeans, dragging me right back to the freezing linoleum of that tiny studio apartment. I pulled my knees tightly to my chest. I had built a thriving business. I owned a piece of the city skyline. I had regulars who knew my name and smiled when I walked into a room. But sitting in the quiet of my kitchen, I realized I was still that 30-year-old girl holding a leather binder, desperately waiting for a man who could not love me to say I had done a good job. Why did one single text message make my hands shake? Why did a tiny, broken part of me still hope he would walk through my door tomorrow and tell me he was proud? Worse than the shaking was the creeping doubt. What if Harold had made a mistake? What if there was some obscure legal loophole in the trust that my father could exploit? Ray Ellison ran companies. I roasted coffee beans. If he challenged the ownership, I did not know how to fight him in a courtroom. I was about to face the man who wrote the rules, and I did not even know the game. I crawled over to the hall closet and pulled out the old canvas duffel bag I kept shoved in the back corner. I dug past heavy winter sweaters until my fingers brushed the small white box I had taken from my mother's desk 4 years ago. I pulled it out and removed the lid. The 3 sealed birthday cards sat inside. I picked the top one up. My thumb traced the careful curves of my mother's cursive ink. She had written my name, she had paid for the postage stamp, but she had never walked to the mailbox. I stared at the sealed flap, my chest tight with a heavy, suffocating weight. I almost slid my finger under the paper edge. I put the card back and pushed the box away. I was not ready for her excuses. I lay flat on my back on the kitchen floor and stared up at the blank white ceiling. I listened to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The absolute stillness of the apartment pressed down on me. I closed my eyes and pictured the dusty sidewalk outside the shop. I saw the faded green jacket. "You keep waiting for your father to see you, Naomi." Harold's rough, gravelly voice echoed clearly in the quiet room. But here is the thing about people who will not open their eyes. You can stand in front of them your whole life and they will walk right through you. Stop standing in front of closed doors. You have already built your own house. My eyes snapped open. The cold tile beneath me suddenly felt solid, grounding. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and the panic slowly began to recede. Replaced by something much harder, Harold was right. The phantom approval I had been chasing was a complete illusion. I did not need my father to validate my existence. More importantly, I realized I did not need Thomas Ackerman to stand next to me tomorrow morning. The lawyer was there to protect the brick and mortar, but the building was not what was actually under attack. My father was coming to tear down my independence, to prove I still belonged to his ledger. Only I could protect myself from that. I pushed myself off the floor. I walked into the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and splashed freezing cold water over my face. I looked at the woman in the mirror. She had dark circles under her eyes, but her jaw was set. She was not a bad investment. She was the owner. I dried my face with a towel, walked into the bedroom, and set my alarm for 5:30 in the morning. I was ready for the doors to open. I unlocked the heavy glass front door of Mackey's at exactly 5:30 in the morning. The downtown air was cold and damp, settling deep into my sweater as I flipped the open sign and turned on the overhead lights. The quiet hum of the refrigerators and the familiar smell of roasted coffee grounded me. Behind the counter, the espresso machine hissed to life. The first shot of the day poured dark and thick into a small white ceramic cup. That cup went on the wooden shelf, right beneath the framed black and white photograph of Harold. Every single morning, same ritual. My fingers brushed the edge of the picture frame. A slow breath, then the green apron around my waist. The morning rush came and went in a blur of steam and ringing cash register drawers. The shop was completely packed. Every table was taken by students studying and locals reading the weekend paper. At 10:15, the brass bell above the front door chimed. I was steaming a pitcher of oat milk for a latte. I looked up toward the entrance. My father stood inside the doorway. My mother hovered nervously, a half step behind him. I did not gasp. I did not drop the metal pitcher. I stood completely still, but my hands betrayed the sudden, violent spike in my chest. I forgot to turn off the steam wand. The hot, white milk frothed right over the rim of the pitcher, spilling rapidly over my knuckles and hissing loud and angry against the metal drip tray. Wes stepped up right beside me. He did not ask questions. He simply reached over, turned the steam dial off, and took the scalding pitcher directly out of my hand. He passed me a clean white towel. I wiped my hands, staring at the man who had thrown me out 4 years ago. Ray Ellison did not look at me like a father seeing his only daughter after years of absolute silence. His eyes swept across the room with cold, calculating precision. He looked at the exposed brick walls. He counted the occupied wooden chairs. He read the prices listed on the chalkboard menu above my head. He was a real estate investor, walking into an open house, silently running the profit margins in his head. He walked right up to the front counter. He wore a crisp navy golf shirt and a heavy silver watch. He smiled, a wide, practiced expression that did not reach his flat eyes. "Look at this place," he said. He pitched his voice loud enough to carry over the background music, ensuring the customers nearby could hear him playing the role of the proud patriarch. "You did good, Naomi, real good. I always knew you had it in you." I placed the damp towel on the counter. "You told me I was throwing my life away." He waved a hand in the air, physically dismissing the memory like it was a minor misunderstanding. "I said what I needed to say to light a fire under you. And it worked, did it not?" My jaw tightened. He was rewriting our entire history right in front of me, transforming his cruel abandonment into a masterclass of tough love. My mother stood quietly near the glass pastry case. She wore a beige cashmere cardigan, her hands tightly gripping her leather purse. Her eyes drifted away from the tension and up toward the brick wall. She stared at the photograph of Harold wearing his faded military cap. She looked at the small, fresh cup of coffee sitting beneath his frame. Her shoulders dropped heavily. She knew exactly what that picture meant. Someone else had stepped in to drink the coffee she refused to share with me. My father pulled out a heavy wooden bar stool and sat down at the counter. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a folded piece of paper directly on the wood. "We are not strangers, Naomi," he said, tapping the paper with his index finger. "We are your parents. I have drawn up a partnership proposal to keep this asset securely in the family. 15% equity, that is generous. I could ask for a lot more. You could ask." I told him. My voice came out completely flat, empty of the fear that used to choke me in his presence. "You could also leave." The fake smile vanished from his face. The polite mask cracked down the middle, revealing the furious, controlling man underneath. "You owe us," he snapped, leaning his weight forward over the counter. 18 years of feeding you, clothing you, putting a roof over your head. That is not free. Your father's mother threw him out at 16, my mother said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it floated clearly over the hiss of the espresso machine. She was still staring at the photograph of Harold. She was not making an excuse for him. She was simply stating a tragic, broken fact. He had built his entire life around controlling everything so he would never be discarded again. My father spun around on the stool. "Vivian." The word cracked like a whip across the room. She immediately looked down at her expensive leather shoes and closed her mouth. But I had heard her. I finally understood the ghost that haunted him. But understanding his damage did not mean I had to let him destroy my life to fix his own. My father stood up. He pushed the heavy wooden stool backward so hard the legs screeched against the floor. He abandoned the supportive father routine completely. He raised his voice, weaponizing the public space to shame me into submission. "Fine. You want to do this the hard way?" he demanded, looking around at the silent customers staring at us. "I know exactly how commercial leases work, sweetheart. One phone call to your landlord, and I will have you out of this building in 30 days. I will call the city and tell them about noise complaints. I will report health code violations in your kitchen. I will do whatever it takes. You think this place is yours? You are just renting someone else's dream." Wes stepped around the edge of the front counter. He held a damp wiping cloth in his hands, his posture completely relaxed, but his eyes incredibly sharp. "Sir." "With all due respect," Wes said, his voice deadly calm, "maybe you should know exactly who you are talking to before you make threats you cannot keep." My father looked Wes up and down with pure, unfiltered disgust. "Who the hell are you? The hired help? I am the guy she gave a chance to when nobody else would," Wes answered, not backing up a single inch. That makes me family. The kind that actually shows up. The entire front half of the coffee shop went completely silent. 3 college students at a window table slowly lowered their books. My father's face turned a deep, mottled red. The veins in his neck stood out against his collar. Nobody spoke to Ray Ellison that way. He reached violently into his jacket pocket and pulled out his cell phone. "That is it," my father snarled, jabbing a thick finger at the screen. "You are done here." I took a slow, steady breath. I looked at the man who had thrown me out into the cold. I looked at my mother, who was still staring silently at the floor. I looked at Wes, standing tall and immovable beside me, and then I looked up at the photograph of Harold on the exposed brick wall. I placed both of my hands flat on the wooden counter. "Sure, Dad," I said, my voice ringing out clearly through the quiet room. "Put him on speaker." My father stared at me across the wooden counter. His thick thumb hovered right over the glass screen of his cellular phone. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the 30-year-old girl to reappear, the one who would apologize, lower her head, and hand over a piece of her life just to keep the peace. I did not blink. I did not move a single muscle. The muscles in his jaw worked furiously. He pressed the bright green button on his screen and tapped the speaker icon. The sharp, digital ringing echoed loudly off the exposed brick walls of the coffee shop. 1 ring. 2. The entire room was completely silent. Nobody scraped a chair. Nobody cleared their throat. Even the hiss of the espresso machine had faded away. A click sounded through the tiny speaker. "Law Office" of Thomas Ackerman. The voice was dry, professional, and entirely unbothered. It was the sound of billable hours and ironclad contracts. My father leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms on the counter. He pitched his voice into that booming, authoritative register he used to intimidate contractors on golf courses. "Yes, this is Raymond Ellison," he announced. "I am calling about your commercial tenant on the ground floor of your downtown property. I need to discuss some serious concerns about the state of her business and the terms of her lease." A beat of static hummed over the line. "Mr. Ellison," the lawyer said, his tone dropping several degrees in warmth. "I am not the landlord. I am the trustee of the Mackey Family Trust. The property you are referring to is not available for discussion, nor is there a lease to negotiate." My father frowned. His thick eyebrows pulled together. "What are you talking about? Who owns the building?" "The property at that address has been owned outright by Miss Naomi Ellison for approximately 14 months, Ackerman stated. The words rang out through the quiet coffee shop, crisp and undeniable. She inherited the estate in its entirety. If you have legal concerns regarding her business, I highly recommend you speak to your own attorney." "Good day." The line clicked dead. The dial tone buzzed flatly into the room. My father did not move to hang up the phone. He just stared at the blank screen. His jaw went slack. His fingers, still hovering over the glass, began to tremble. The room full of strangers watched him shrink 2 inches in his expensive golf shirt. Wes stood quietly behind the register. He picked up a clean white towel and began methodically wiping down a glass pitcher. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply stood exactly where a family member should stand. I looked at the man who had thrown me out into the cold. "I did not buy it, Dad," I told him. My voice was completely steady. There was no anger left in my chest, only the absolute, unshakable truth. A man I brought coffee to every single morning for 3 years left it to me. He left me his legacy because I showed up. That is it. I just showed up. The words hung heavy in the air between us. I was not talking about the real estate anymore. We both knew exactly what I meant. A complete stranger had given me the world just for sitting on a milk crate and asking about his day, while the man who raised me had demanded a $120,000 return on his investment before he would even look at me. My father scrambled for purchase. His hands gripped the edge of the wooden counter. The illusion of his total control was shattering right in front of him, and he was desperate to glue the pieces back together. We will see about that, he snapped, his voice tight and reedy. We are your parents. We have biological rights. If some old fool left you a commercial property, we have a legal claim on the estate. Family comes first in a probate court. That is not how trust law works, Dad. The words came out flat, almost tired. Parents have zero legal claim on a third-party trust left to an adult child. Zero. He reached to dial the phone again. I would not do that, sir, Wes said quietly from the espresso machine. Shut up! My father hissed, completely losing his polished facade. You do not know anything about trust law. He does not, I agreed. But Ackerman does. The lawyer told me about a specific protective clause Harold put in the trust paperwork. He wrote it the week before he died. It specifically addresses any future claims from my biological family members. He made sure you could never touch a single brick of this place. My father froze. His hands slowly dropped from the counter. Harold Mackey had protected me from the grave. He had known exactly what kind of vultures would circle the moment the property transfer became public. It was a complete checkmate. There were no loopholes. There was no leverage. I looked at my mother. Vivian Ellison was staring at my father like she was seeing a stranger. Her hands were shaking where she gripped her expensive leather purse. Dad, I said, drawing his furious eyes back to mine. How did you even know about this place? He straightened his collar, trying to recover a shred of his dignity. We saw it online. We saw the video. The viral video was posted 6 months ago. I corrected him, watching his jaw clench. But someone called my cell phone from a blocked number 2 months ago. 3 missed calls. Right after the county property transfer records went public. I checked the digital logs this morning. I paused, letting the silence stretch out until it became unbearable. It was Trent, was it not? My father did not say a word. He did not deny it. He just stared at the wooden counter. My mother let out a sharp, ragged breath. She turned completely toward the man she had obeyed for nearly 40 years. You told me Trent did not know, she whispered. The truth assembled itself in the quiet room. Trent had found the property transfer in the public records. Trent, with his gambling debts and his suspended license, had sent our parents here so he could skim the profits later. The golden child had turned his own parents into collection agents, and my father knew. He came anyway, because controlling me mattered more than admitting his favorite son was using him. Vivian Ellison let go of her leather purse. It slid down her arm and hit the floor with a heavy thud. She did not bend down to pick it up. For the very first time in my entire life, she did not look at my father for permission to speak. She looked directly at me. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, swimming with a grief so profound it made my own chest ache. I should have mailed those cards, she said. Her voice broke on the final word. Every person in the room heard it. The college students at the window table looked away. Wes quietly set down the pitcher he was holding. My breath caught hard in my throat. She knew. She remembered leaving the white box in the back of her desk drawer 4 years ago. She knew I had found them while packing my bags. She had counted every single one of my birthdays in absolute, terrifying silence, writing out her love on expensive paper but never finding the courage to actually walk to a mailbox. 4 years of stamped envelopes that never left the drawer. 4 birthdays counted in silence. Her handwriting on every single one, careful and steady, because the writing was the one part she could control. I looked at her standing there. A small, quiet woman trapped in a cage she had helped build. The anger I had carried for 4 years did not explode. It just dissolved, leaving behind something much harder to carry. A hollow, aching sadness. Knowing she had counted my birthdays did not fix the past. It did not change the freezing floor, the unanswered phone calls, the 6 seconds of defense she managed before going silent. But it was the truth, and the truth, it turned out, weighed more than the anger ever did. My father pushed himself away from the counter. His hands hung at his sides. For the first time in my life, Ray Ellison had absolutely nothing left to say. No comeback, no threat, no rewrite. The building belonged to me. The trust was sealed. His golden child had used him like a credit card. Every single lever of control he had ever pulled was broken. He turned toward the door. "Dad," he stopped. He did not turn around. His broad shoulders were rigid under the navy golf shirt, locked tight, bracing for whatever I was about to say. "I am not going to give you 15%, I told him. My voice was steady. Not angry, not cold, just clear. "I am not going to give you 5. Not because I cannot afford it, because what you are asking for is not money. You are asking me to pretend the last 4 years did not happen. And they did. Every single day of them happened." The espresso machine hissed softly behind me. A car horn sounded faintly through the front windows, but I will tell you what I will do. I reached under the counter and pulled out a small business card pinned to the community board. "If Trent needs help, real help, not gambling money, there is a rehabilitation counselor named Dana who comes in here every Wednesday morning. She is one of my regulars. Her number is on this card." I set the card on the edge of the counter. My father stared at it. He did not pick it up. He walked to the front door, pushed it open with his shoulder, and stepped out onto the sidewalk without a word. The brass bell chimed once behind him. He did not look back. My mother stayed. She stood in the middle of the shop for a long, quiet moment. Her leather purse was still on the floor where she had dropped it. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us moved to close the distance. There was too much broken floor between us, and we both knew it. She bent down slowly, picked up her purse, and straightened her cardigan. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "The coffee smells wonderful," she said. It was such a small, strange thing to say. After everything. After the threats and the trust clause, and the speaker phone call that blew her husband's authority to pieces. She stood in the wreckage of her family and complimented the coffee. But I understood. It was the only sentence she could say out loud that would not start a war in the car ride home. It was not an apology. It was not forgiveness. It was Vivian Ellison, standing in her daughter's shop, saying the only honest thing she was brave enough to speak. "I see what you built. I see you." She turned and walked out through the glass door. The bell chimed a second time. Through the window, I watched her climb into the passenger seat. My father started the engine. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. Wes appeared beside me with a fresh towel over his shoulder. He did not ask if I was okay. He just started wiping down the counter where my father had been sitting. He flipped the folded partnership proposal into the trash can without reading it. "You want me to start the afternoon batch?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah. Let us do that." The rest of the day passed in the warm rhythm of orders and grinding beans and the hiss of steam. I moved through the motions, but something inside my chest had shifted. It was not heavier. It was not lighter. It was just different. Like a bone that had finally been set after years of healing crooked. That night, I closed the shop at 9. I swept the floor. I locked the heavy front door. I walked upstairs to my apartment and sat down at the kitchen table. The white box was already sitting there. I had pulled it out the night before and left it on the counter. 3 sealed envelopes. 3 birthdays I spent alone. I picked up the first one. My thumb ran along the sealed edge. I slid my finger under the flap and opened it. The card had a small painting of a yellow cake with white frosting on the front. Inside, my mother's careful cursive read, "Happy birthday, baby. I made your favorite cake today even though you were not here to eat it. I left a slice in the refrigerator, just in case. I know that is silly, but I left it." I set it down and opened the second, a simple card with blue flowers. The handwriting was shakier. "I am counting your birthdays even if I cannot say happy birthday." You turned 32 today. I wonder if you still drink your coffee black. The third card was the thinnest, just a folded piece of heavy cream stationery, no store-bought card at all. The ink was slightly smudged, like she had written it in a hurry, or through tears. I hope wherever you are, someone is being kind to you. That is all I pray for now. Please be okay. Please. I put the 3 cards down on the table in a row. I did not cry. A small, quiet smile pulled at the corner of my mouth. The smile of a woman who finally understood that her mother had loved her from inside a locked room, pressing her hands against the glass, writing messages she was too afraid to send. It did not fix anything. It did not erase the freezing linoleum or the silent phone or the 6 seconds of courage that ran out too fast. But it was real, and real, even when it is broken, is always better than nothing. I carried the 3 cards downstairs in the dark. The shop was closed, the chairs stacked on the tables, the espresso machine cooling with soft metallic ticks. I placed the cards on the wooden shelf, right next to the framed photograph of Harold Mackey and the small white cup I filled for him every morning. 2 kinds of love, sitting side by side. One that was loud and steady and showed up every single day, and one that was silent and frightened and hid in the back of a desk drawer for 4 years. Both real, both true, both part of who I became. I stood there for a while in the quiet dark, looking at the shelf. Then I locked the door and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up at 5. I tied my apron. I unlocked the heavy glass front door and flipped the sign. The downtown air was cool and smelled like rain. I turned on the espresso machine, pulled the first shot, and poured it into a small white cup. I placed it on the shelf beneath Harold's photograph, right next to 3 birthday cards that had finally been opened. The brass bell above the door chimed. The first customer of the day walked in, a young woman with tired eyes and a heavy backpack, clearly running on no sleep and too much stress. I smiled at her. "Morning. What can I get you?" She ordered a black coffee. Medium roast. No sugar. I poured it myself. Harold was right. I had spent years standing in front of a closed door, waiting for someone to open it from the other side. I did not need them to open it. I just needed to realize I had already built my own house, and it smelled like fresh coffee and second chances.